at it if you haven't already, but I think a lot of people have already looked at it, so we don't really have anything to discuss unless someone looked at it and has something they want to talk about.
Pull it from here then.
Also, Mitch, you're pretty quiet. I can hear you, but it's quiet.
Sorry, forgot to turn the mic back up. Is that better?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So the conclusion for that one was that we are not going to make backward compatible changes for now, but when we introduce HBON and other things, we may. No, that was my memory.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
Cool. Well, then in that case, John, why don't you run this down for us?
Yeah, this is an issue, but it's really more of a short design doc. So let me give some background for people that don't remember. So for CNI, we've had this long-standing issue of this race condition where node starts up and there's no CNI pod scheduled yet. And then other pods start running on the node, they get injected, and they come out before the CNI, so they don't get their IP tables programmed. Now, a long time ago, what would happen then is they would just be broken forever, and Istio wouldn't work, and there'd be RBAC bypasses, et cetera. So we introduced two different solutions to solve this, and both of them I think are bad. And the first one is we inject like this sidecar or this init container that actually checks whether the IP table rules are there. And then if it's not, we either kill the pod or we just label it and expect the user to kill it. The reason for the latter is because killing pods is kind of a high privilege and scary operation. Two downsides to that. One is adding init container is actually really slow. And also, like, we give this high privilege to the controller, and it's super confusing because you get a pod, and then all of a sudden it's deleted, and you get another pod, and then maybe it works. And it's also inefficient because we may have 99 nodes that have CNI, and the pod happens to get scheduled on our one node that doesn't have CNI ready yet, and then it has to bounce over to another node. So that's kind of the default today, but I really don't like it, which is what inspired this. We had this other option that is better in many ways, but basically in Kubernetes, you can put a taint on a node, and then only pods that have a toleration for that taint will be scheduled there. So effectively what we do is we add a taint that says, like, don't schedule anything here. And then once CNI is ready, we just remove the taint. Now, the problem is that in order to tell Kubernetes to start the node with the taint, like, there's no API in Kubernetes to do that. It's like a cloud vendor specific thing. And so it's great if you're going to go in, your GK UI and like add this toleration, but it's not something that you can just do like Istio cuddle install and things just work. So I was thinking and came up with this alternative. The thing that concerns me about it is that it seems very simple, and many people, including myself, thought about this for years and didn't come up with it. So I'm trying to tell as many people about it to see if someone says, like, points out some obvious reason why it doesn't work. But basically, we do the same thing as a taint controller, but we kind of invert the logic. So instead of putting a taint on the node, we just add a node selector on the pod, and we say, OK, select where nodes that have CNI is ready. And then once CNI is ready, we add that label to the node. That's it. So I want to run this by people, see if there's any concerns, thoughts, anything on CNI.
It's certainly better than what we have today. No question about it. I don't like the fact that it still depends a bit on injection. So we'll never be able to have injection free with this proposal, or well, not soon. And still requires pretty high privileges. I mean, labeling nodes is not, but that's probably OK because, I don't know, there is no alternative.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, CNI is pretty high privilege, right? It's on its own, like it. Yeah.
Where do you want to put
There's
this
no way to
logic?
just say label, I guess. You have to give full patching node, which is, I guess, unfortunate.
Do you want to do it in Istio WG, or do you want to do it in CNI itself?
I think the CNI should, because then the CNI will
Okay,
do its
then I don't have
own
a problem.
node. Yeah,
That's perfect. I mean, CNI anyway, it's super high privilege.
yeah. Basically,
Okay.
The CNI will be like, its code will be, okay, I start up, install it, set the label, and then when I tear down, unset the label, uninstall it.
Okay,
That's
perfect. Then I
Yeah.
have no concerns.
Yeah. Any other opinions?
Hey, John, maybe I missed something. So, uh, what if there's a new pod that's been deployed after you mark it as CNI ready equal true? Like, you wouldn't know the new pod is ready, right?
Yeah, let me explain like how it works. So let's say I install Istio and CNI takes a long time to start up because we're pulling images or whatever, right? Now, at that time, no pods will have the ready label, right? And so if I try to start an injected pod, it will be hung on scheduling and say something in the events like, no nodes are ready, nothing meets CNI is true, right? Now, eventually, one CNI pod comes up, it marks its node as ready. Now we'll start scheduling pods that are injected onto that node. And then as more and more nodes come up, they'll start getting pods scheduled on those nodes. As new pods come up, we'll see that I have like 100 nodes with ready is true, so we'll pick one of those 100. If there's still some nodes that aren't ready because they're new nodes or they have some issue, then they won't get scheduled there. One other thing I didn't mention as well is right now CNI is deployed on every node in the cluster. One thing this would allow us to do is only like allow users to specify which nodes, and you can say like, I don't know, I only want CNI on mesh equals true nodes, and I'm responsible. I add that to like some node pools or something, and then this would naturally like cause all of the injected pods to go to those nodes because they would have that label selector as well.
Okay, so this is just an indication of whether that particular node is ready to schedule, can take pods for injection, but not necessarily mean the injected pods have the right IP table rules configured. Because the reason I'm asking
it means nothing about the pods.
Yeah.
It's saying it's ready to schedule, and if
Gotcha.
it's ready to schedule, then we know for sure that it will install the IP tables rules.
Okay, yeah. So it's not get rid of the validation container, which what we have today.
I want to get
part
rid of
the
validation container because unless there's a bug in Istio in the implementation, there's no way that the validation container can fail with this method.
Okay, so it could potentially indirectly get rid of that as well if it takes care of this initial scheduling up front, so we couldn't get into the race condition which we have today.
Yes.
One quick comment here. The init container serves dual purpose. One is what you described, but another purpose is to warm up the proxy image. So when the two containers start, it's not a big deal because we also have the wait for application to be ready and all the other stuff. But it's a very convenient thing to speed up the startup of the proxy container. Anyway, that's not probably the reason to keep it, but. So John, unless there is objection, I think this is clearly far better than what we have. So I would be 100% to move as fast as possible with implementing it because it's pretty nasty today.
Yeah, I have an implementation, by the way. It's like a trivial 2-liner change, basically. I mean, we'll clean up a lot more, but like the proof of concept.
Happy to approve.
I guess the other part is, okay, we implement this. That part's easy. What do we do with the rest of the stuff? I think the tank controller is kind of dead. It was made it has a lower quality of code than the rest of the project. I suspect that there's a lot of issues with it. So I feel like we should kill that.
One release after. I mean,
yeah, like in the validation as well. Like in my head, it's like the validation's useless now, but also if I'm wrong, then it's a CVE. So I feel like we should keep it for now, and
Let's keep it for 2 releases, a validation for 2 releases and then control of 1 release. So basically any new feature should have a flag, so users should, not blind. Well, maybe you can enable by default, but it should be a kill flag.
Yeah.
But then we keep it 1 release, and then we remove the validation in a second release, 115.
Yeah, that sounds good. So okay, so in today's state, you have the thing that kills the pods and labels it, and that is expected to actually kill things. In the next release, we'll say it should never kill things if it is file a bug because we screwed up entirely, and if no one files any bugs, then we can remove it maybe. And we should add some artificial testing as well. It's pretty easy to actually test this because spin up new nodes, or you can just artificially make CNI slower and whatnot. So
I would still add an option to kind of move to the correct way. I mean, basically just disable and time controller. And
yeah, I'll make a flag for enable validation or something. Yeah.
It probably would be a good idea to get Stuart's perspective on this. All the other authors and approvers of this document have moved on. So just for continuity's sake, he might have an interesting perspective there.
Yeah, I asked Stuart, so
Cool.
he said it seemed reasonable.
Great. All right. Sounds like conversations wrapped up there. Costin, it looks like you're up next with authorization policy, TCP, and HTTP.
Yes, that's a nasty one and complicated. So how it started, we are planning to promote authorization policy to V1. And I wanted to do additional testing and to look how it applies to the age-born proposals that we also have. And, kind of figure out if we have enough testing. And while looking at the test cases, I rediscovered, because I suspect we discussed it in the past, I mean, when we had a CV or something like that, that the way the authorization policy is specified today, in particular the deny rules, the moment you add a deny rule for a GET request, for example, you have an application using mostly TCP rules, and then you discover then, you have a security bug or you have some denial of service on a particular request, and you add a deny rule for GET with some path or whatever. The moment you do that, the implementation is blocking all TCP traffic. So all TCP deny GET also implies deny all TCP. And there is a good explanation of why it's implemented that way, but it's probably not something that we need to either clearly document, that adding any HTTP results in TCP, all TCP traffic being denied and blocked, and may cause an outage and so forth. Even if we document it, I'm not entirely sure, because there are all kind of behavior. If you read the code carefully, there are all kind of behaviors. It's not GET. I mean, GET definitely blocks all TCP traffic, but if you do GET and a port, it may only block all TCP traffic on that port. If you do GET at the principal, it will block. I mean, so it's a very confusing behavior that I don't think anyone really understands, and it's certainly not documented. So moving forward, I have a list of proposals if you scroll down to kind of improve the situation. So, and I'll start with easy and end up with the most complicated mitigation. Easiest, again, we document the behavior. We promote to V1 with the specifications that, hey, you want to get all TCP is broken, and that's life. The second is to fix the root cause that we block TCP traffic when HTTP is added, which is the fact that we don't really know if it's TCP or HTTP because of sniffing, and the ports are not clearly declared. So if we fix the code to match the implementation, it will mean if you declare the port as TCP, then only TCP rules will apply to that port. I mean, GET obviously will never apply because it's never HTTP. We can modify before we move to V1 with other requirement in the specs that you must have a port when you add an HTTP rule. So any rule with method GET without a port will be invalid, which will mitigate 90% of the cases, because most of the time you have, HTTP has some determined ports. We can have an explicit TCP authorization rule and HTTP authorization rule, but that's probably too much. The main benefit is matching the new gateway and gamma APIs where HTTP and TCP are separated. And finally, if we are continuing to move to HBON, which is basically a protocol where we overlay TCP over HTTP, then suddenly the API makes sense, because then you all TCP connections will have additional headers like 404 and other headers, and we could actually have rules that are using header conditions and some stuff. However, this is very confusing because HBON is more like a transport layer, and it's not entirely clear how it will interact. I mean, it's not clear how will the express envelope, transport attributes versus inner protocol attributes, and there are all kind of confusions around this behavior. So my proposal here is for people to first of all think about the HBON case and how this will interact with HBON, and also before we move to V1 to choose at least one of the options above, or more than one, I don't know. They're not options. I mean, all of them need to be considered and may or may not be implemented before we move to V1. But the worst is to move to V1 and with the current specification and without telling users that, hey, you added an HTTP rule, boom, all your TCP traffic is down. Comments? I know John has strong opinions about it, so.
So I have a few comments. I think this document first point out that the test case is harder to understand. What does this test case is testing? It has a mix of HTTP and TCP, deny and allow cases. So I think that test case needed to have better documentation. Another part is the policy part, right? So basically, the policy has a similar problem of difficult to understand. Maybe we need to improve the documentation for the policy. Yeah.
Sorry, the test is actually perfect. I mean, it's a very good test. It's probably the best example of a good test that I found in a long time, because it reflects what happens. I mean, if you look at the golden file, you can understand that the addition of the get rule is resulting in blocking TCP traffic. But the real problem here is that if users try to add the get rule, the deny rule for a HTTP method, it causes an outage. So operationally, it is very unsafe for users to not be aware of this behavior, and the behavior contradicts the text of the policy, because the policy is to deny get, not to deny all TCP.
Arjen. I see Arjen raised the hands. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, for sniffing port, the behavior is good, I guess. We can document it somewhere. But for the pure TCP ports, why can't we just remove the HTTP semantics from the OGG policy and then apply it?
I'll let John respond to that because he has a good explanation.
Yeah, so the reason we do it this way is if we say deny all GET requests, now a TCP request comes in. TCP includes HTTP, right? And that request could be a GET request. We just don't know because we're not doing HTTP processing. So we only have two options, as far as I know, at Envoy. We can either have false negatives or false positives. So if we just ignore the HTTP stuff, then we may have a GET request come in, and we don't know it's a GET request, so we let it through. And some may consider that a bypass of the policy. The other option, which is what we've implemented, is say, I don't know if it's a GET request, so to be safe, I'm just going to deny it. All right. That doesn't bypass the policy, but it has caused some concern that now we're denying essentially all traffic, right?
And to clarify, I mean, the problem here is that, well, obviously HTTP is over TCP, but if your protocol is declared as MySQL, I mean, I have a port that is MySQL, and a request comes to the MySQL, even if it looks like an HTTP GET, nobody expects it to be blocked by a GET request, because you know for sure, MySQL is accepting the binary MySQL protocol and not be blocked by if someone says that the GET request should be denied. So one of the proposals here is that if the port is clearly declared, we do not do that. So the MySQL will not be affected by a get because we know for sure what it is. But with sniffing, I completely agree with John. It's not safe to allow sniffing and HTTP rules at the same time.
Marco?
Yeah. So for the path you want, you propose when letting users specify the TCP or HTTP part, do you like being to more CRDs or change the current APIs in the authorization process?
I don't know. The only reason I am suggesting this, and it's not my favorite option for fixing Istio, would be if we want to. I mean, if we discuss in the context of the gateway API where there is an attachment policy, in the gateway API, the HTTP is clearly identified with HTTP route, and it's not mixed with TCP. So there is, if we allow policies to attach to routes, then the policy will attach to an HTTP route. But again, it can also be solved by having the current authorization policy and allowing, if it's attached to an HTTP route, it's treated as HTTP, and we allow HTTP attributes. If it's attached to a TCP route, we reject it if it has any HTTP attribute. It kind of has the same purpose.
Just to clarify, is the current authorization policies behavior on HTTP allow and deny correct? Is there any bugs or?
Well, there is no bug. I mean, if you consider that the intent of deny get means deny all TCP, but it's not this is not a documented behavior. So the first option here is to document that add deny get means deny TCP. So users at least know what's happening. I was not consciously realizing this, even if kind of. So, yeah, John.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say on the sniffing, like everything you said was accurate. Like it is weird. Like if you declare your port as MySQL, then clearly you probably don't care about HTTP rules, right? My concern would be that the protocol declarations are not always accurate, for lack of a better word. So like if we turned off sniffing entirely, then undeclared ports are considered TCP. So that's an obvious one. But even if you declare a port TCP, right, I may just be deploying some Helm chart. I don't know what the name is. They may have slapped on some Istio name intentionally or accidentally, or they just wanted to disable HTTP processing, right? They don't necessarily know. And so I would worry about like implicitly, like I have you could like look at it the other way around. I could say I have my policy, all of a sudden I change my port name and now everything is allowed and I have a bypass, right? Like I guess it's the implicit part that worries me. If we had something that was like you mentioned before, like HTTP authorization policy or something like that, then it may be a bit different. I will say, like, if you want to do this today in Istio properly, the way to do it is to scope your authorization policy to a specific port, right? So it's absolutely hard to do and underdocumented. I don't deny that, but it is possible. And at the very least, we should document it.
I put that required port for HTTP roles. It's not as simple as it sounds, because if you use the same port that some people do for both HTTP and TCP, which is probably something you should never allowed in the first place, but then it has the same behavior, because again, it needs to be explicit port, explicit workload, basically. If you do that, we could document that again. You have this workaround.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. Yeah.
But again, it's very, very easy to make mistakes and to forget this, so unless we require the port for HTTP rules, port and workload selector, we'll have outages on our hand. I agree with you that with sniffing, it is not safe. So that's why I'm saying that if the user explicitly opts support us, yes, I know it's TCP, I don't want HTTP rules, please don't break me, we should allow it. But if they are, whatever, guess if it's TCP or HTTP, then yes, if they put an HTTP rule, hey, we cannot guess for you perfectly, so we
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this reminds me of, I don't know if you remember that design doc that was like, stop applying authorization policies to East-West Gateway. I was at least opposed to it. I forget what your opinion was, but in many ways, the premise of that doc is that it's really easy to apply an authorization policy that accidentally applies to east-west gateway and breaks everything. And so we should not apply it. And in some ways, this is the same. Like, it is really easy to accidentally apply an L7 policy to a TCP port and then break it. It feels quite similar. I mean, we may say it's much easier and more likely, because I think to do the east-west one, you have to do kind of a rule that's kind of nonsense. Whereas this, like, I think many people could run into this, but it's still kind of similar idea.
Yes, and please look at the last part. I mean, the H-bone is the one that worries me, because we should shape whatever decision we make based on the future protocol and ability to have kind of separation. I mean, we should be able to apply rules on the at the TCP level, at H-bone level, which have some headers, like forwarded for baggage and other stuff. But at the same time, again, there is a mix between you know, can you apply TCP rules for H-bones that are, you know, when the actual TCP doesn't. I don't know. It's very confusing for me as well, and I don't think I have a full understanding of how this should work with H-bone. With H-bone, it's very clear because we have much better separation between things.
When the authorization policies work at the L4 level, the TCP level, does it really care about the L7 level headers or content or method, get method, or it's just only care about the port, allow a port or deny a port? Or
that's what I'm saying. I mean, it shouldn't. I mean, if you read the specification and you see that deny, get, deny a TCP, you would assume that there is no implication, no relation between them. But in reality, the TCP rules care about some other GET request because it suddenly becomes irrelevant. I mean, if you can, it doesn't matter if you have allow or deny on TCP. As soon as you add the GET, the L7 rule, it breaks you.
Okay, it seems like the current authorization policy actually is a mix of both L4 and L7 allow or deny rules. Basically, yes. It will look into the headers, even though it's TCP, it will say, okay, if it is a GET for TCP, then allow or deny. So that's confusion comes from.
Yeah, and there is also a condition where you can have, you know, kind of expressions which may include some headers, and then it's even some headers, you know, you need to know very well which header, if it's HTTP header or a TCP header.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up question on my previous question. I just need to know it more. So for example, let's say we apply a deny policy on some namespace and there is some path and there's some port in the policy. And we create two different filters, HTTP filter and TCP filter. While creating the HTTP filter, we have the port and path both. And for the TCP filter, let's say we just keep just the port, we don't apply the path there. What's wrong in that configuration? If we do like this, then the TCP traffic won't be having the HTTP part, and that will be good. And the HTTP one will work.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not. We have the end condition. I mean, so basically, when you have a rule saying that get and principal foo, there you deny if it is get and if it's from a particular source. So you cannot just say that TCP level, you know, keeps the TCP.
Okay, understood.
Because they are mixed together. I mean, it's an expression that combines both. At HTTP, you can apply. I mean, the rule applied at HTTP level is perfect, but at TCP level, if you know it's HTTP,
okay.
It's true. I mean, otherwise, if you put something, it's most likely not doing what you expect.
Got it. So all the HTTP traffic will get lost in that case. Good. Got it.
For deny in particular.
Yeah.
Quick question regarding on the H-bone. So, Costin, for you've mentioned that for the current authorization policies that mix of the L4 and L7, it does. Would that be something makes sense for H-bone? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying it. I'm asking mostly. I mean, I'm saying that H-bone allows headers and attributes to be added. I mean, one of the main features of HBON is that TCP traffic can have rich information attached in a well-defined way. You have baggage where you have all the telemetry attributes. We have X404, which includes the path, and we may have additional standard headers. So the authorization policy with attributes like X404 and other headers with HBON will look perfectly on paper, but it's not entirely clear what is the user intent and if we want to tie the API's authorization policy of a particular transport, because HBON, it's not kind of a mandatory transport. It's not guaranteed that all TCP will have so it's an opportunity, but it's also a risk. So that's why I want to make sure that before we move to V1, we at least discuss and understand how it will impact HBON, if at all.
Okay. So for it's like from the discussion involved, it sounds like currently that there's nothing wrong with the behavior for the authorization policies, right? And
I mean, you mean the current behavior?
yeah,
I mean, I would argue it's very wrong. I mean,
It's confusing, yeah.
it's confusing, but
it's outrage-inducing.
yeah, it feels more like it needs the clarity on the instructions on the documentation. Right.
Yeah, I agree. The documentation definitely need improvement. If costing and other, Istio members don't understand it, I suspect users won't understand it either. So I think, Ian, you have a PR to promote authorization policies to stable. Maybe we can improve the documentation for authorization policies, provide more examples, explain it better and figure out, whether there are some behavior problem. And if they are, what are our future directions to improve it? For example, like a gateway API have a clear separation of HTTP and TCP, or if the current behavior is correct, for example, our future path for a HBON, or things like that. But I think we can start from the documentation. The CRD change and API change can be a very long discussion. Yeah.
Probably would also be good to get input from our other security leads, Limin and Lizan.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so one suggestion on documentation, I discussed with Marco yesterday, and probably we think for the documentation part, there are all different fields. We can mention it's a HTTP field or a TCP field. Probably that would be better, right?
It's very tricky for documentation also. I tried to look a bit at so it's not as simple as I describe it. Like if you add an HTTP rule, you deny all TCP. So if we declare that adding an HTTP rule deny all TCP traffic will be lying, because the behavior is not really that. It's if you declare an HTTP rule with only get, you deny all TCP traffic. If you have HTTP get and principal, you don't deny all TCP traffic. You deny all TCP traffic from that principal, which is even more confusing. If you have another attribute like TCP, again, so it's a very weird behavior that you need to look deeply into the code to understand what it's actually happening and how it applies. I don't even know how you could write it down.
Oh, okay. Cool. I'll just take a look on this.
But my only preference here, I mean, and I'm open to a lot of options here, but my strong preference would be to have a way to clearly separate applying L4 rules versus applying L7 rules. So we can have an implementation that for L4 it's translate to network policy, or is more efficient, because a lot of those things can be done by programming IP tables or more efficient implementation. And we can separate applying HTTP rules maybe in gateways or some other place from the L4, as it should be, because L4 and L7 are separate for a reason.
Yeah, so if we do separate, by the way, which I really like the way, HTTP route and TCP routes are separated, because it's always been really, really confusing when user create like virtual service and have the TCP have different semantics than HTTP. I think we're touching the exact same problem with authorization policy here. So if we do separate, I guess what puzzles me now is so let's say maybe I have my TCP authorization policy at the TCP layer, but then if I'm also using HTTP, am I going to also need a HTTP authorization policy as well? So it's like the defense in depth. Well, we recommend people to use network policy, which is often layer 3 and layer 4, right? Along with Istio authorization policy. So that's the struggle I have. Would we do both, similar as what Istio security best practice recommends people to do?
That's an excellent point, Lynn. John, sorry for answering Lynn before you have your hand up. What you're saying is that for a lot of TCP, you can also use network policy, because if you want to deny requests from a particular CIDR range or a lot of attributes, and a network policy will be far more efficient and kick in before we even hit an envoy. And that's what I was trying to also hint about, kind of ability for TCP rules to be translated automatically or be combined with network policies. I don't know the answer. I mean, from if we separate TCP policy and HTTP policy, we'll have to answer the question: how does TCP policy relate to network policy in Kubernetes?
Right. What would the user use, basically, right? What are the conditions? Do they really need TCP authorization policy if they already have a good CNI that supports network policy? Yeah.
If network policy had the notion of principal, then we could say that it's sufficient, but they don't. They only have labels. We could say that we label our workloads with a principal somehow. I mean, we can inject the principal SPIFFE as a label, and then network policy could be applied eventually to principal if you, well, it's tricky.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, with Cilian, like they don't have it right now, right? That's what they are working on next. So it might land there someday soon. But today they don't.
That's exactly what I had in mind, Cilium and other implementation like Cilium, where they can do smarter things at L-Force level. John, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say, I mean, we talked about adding like a whole new TCP auth policy and HTTP auth policy, which is, even if it's a good idea, it's a high bar, to change your API. But one thing that we could do that's similar is auth policy has like a win clause. And today you can do, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. But what if we added protocol to the list of things you could do? So you could have a policy that says, okay, deny GET requests when protocol is HTTP. And then that seems like you get what you want. I mean, you have to know to do it, and you have to, opt into it. But at least then, if you know you want to do it, which hopefully the docs will be like, hey, this is something you should look out for and do it. And we call out like a clear example. It's a really easy fix.
That's true. Again, I don't know exactly how it will look like. It will also fit with a Kubernetes gateway, because in Kubernetes gateway it depends what you can attach. If it's implemented as an attachment policy attachment, then you attach to a particular section in the gateway, which is clearly declared HTTP or TCP, or you attach to a particular route, and then things naturally work. So with Kubernetes gateway with Gamma, the authorization policy we have would work pretty nice because it's attached explicitly. The problem is that, again, it's not attached. It's attached to all workloads, all ports, and then you guess what the port is.
Yeah, I mean, what John mentioned, I think that could be an interesting solution for people who really need to declare. I guess for most simple scenario, I'd rather people doesn't have to. Like, if that's the only protocol, we should automatically think out for the user. But if there's any confusing, they could potentially put this particular clause.
I think when we say deny GET, we implicitly mean deny HTTP GET, right? Because if you have some proprietary application protocol that somehow use GET or other verbs, how do you know? Yeah, you need to scan the entire packet, or?
No. I mean, that's what anyone most people will assume that if you put get, it means that get for HTTP, because it's but that's not our implementation. Our implementation is that deny get means deny TCP. That's what we're trying to solve.
So can we fix that in our implementation to, if it's get, it would just only be HTTP?
John has a very good point with sniffing. No, because you will always be insecure because you never know how the sniffing will treat the packet and
Okay.
out sniffing with explicit port. Yes, we can. I mean, it's very easy.
Okay, yeah. So if I declare my protocol, then we should be able to say that get should only be valid on HTTP.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
It's not easy, but again, if you declare the protocol explicitly, it should disable sniffing and should work and be safe. But that's okay. Let's not. I don't think I'm not looking for an answer in this meeting. Please think about it and make concrete proposals that with any combination and that may be feasible to implement. And we maybe discuss next time. So maybe move it to.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
No, does this going to hold up any of the promotion to stable for authorization policy, right?
I would hope so. I would hope so.
That's what we discussed on Monday.
At least minimally document. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we should. I mean, part of promotion to V1 includes thinking about this, includes thinking if we have sufficient testing and if the documentation reflects what we are doing. So I think, yeah, that's part of the process of promotion.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. We should start with better documentation, and we can comment on the documentation to figure out, what are the possible improvements or what are the future directions for it.
Should we move to the next topic?
Yeah. Who is the presenter for the next topic? The Istio WG
yeah,
I think Francis left, right? So
Okay.
Francis, I think, was the one who was going to mention this. So, yeah, basically, if I don't know, are any of the 1.15 release managers here? I guess Daniel is.
Ian is also a release manager for 1.15. Right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I'm shadowing Sam in that.
So I
Yeah,
think
I'm here.
they have so they published the beta.0, right? And so it's ready to test.
Yes.
And I think the current schedule, and Francis or one of the release managers can correct me, is code freeze is how long away before we have to start cutting a release, a release candidate build and getting ready to release the actual 1.15? I was
That I'm not
thinking it
sure
was
of.
next week.
I know
some
we
reason,
we
I
had
was
mentioned
thinking
there
it
was
was next
slid.
Yeah, and I think he slid it out a week, which I think meant that code freeze was a week from today and release is 2 weeks from today. But so that really means we have a week to test it, if that's the case, to get things in before code freeze.
Seems really quick.
Yes. And the reason I say
From
that,
my
'cause
understanding,
seemed to
it
me
was
he
originally. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say originally it was scheduled for the 17th to be code freeze with the release candidate, and the 24th is release. But my understanding was everything slid to the right 1 week because we were a little behind on the branch cutting. So to me, that means it'd be 2 weeks from today for code freeze, and then 3 weeks for the release. So
That
at
sounds a
very
lot
end of the
better to me.
month. Yeah, 31st would be the release if we slid everything right 1 week.
Okay. Well, I think the bullet at least is there is a beta.0 out there. If you can test it, and I believe Francis said he was going to come up with the list of doc pages that needed manual testing. So I think that's it for that item.
So for the last item, I see, Facila, you're asking about CNCF mentorship program with regard to Istio. So we are not currently a CNCF project. We are going through the donation process. I think we hope to hear back from the CNCF sometime this month with regards to that donation. But participation in things like mentorship and ambassador programs would probably not take place until the donation goes through. Assuming the donation goes through.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but once the donation goes through, this is exactly the sort of thing that we should be looking at. There are a number of benefits to being a CNCF project, including this program, and we absolutely should look at taking advantage of all of them.
Okay.
Including the one I'm really excited about is a Slack account that doesn't have my messages disappear after 13 days. That'll be pretty sweet. Anyone else have anything for this week? All right. Well, in that case, we'll see you all next week. Same time, same channel.
Bye.
Bye.